As we enter this new year, one fact is already apparent. The sector is dead. It's over. It's never been more over. Nick Rekieta has won Kiwi Farm's Lolcow of the Year poll by a league, and I take this as a symbol for that idea which I've already related to some of you, that this side of the internet is in a post-sektur era. That word, post-sektur, is a silly thing. When I posted it to the sector senate half a year ago for everybody to see, that was also a silly thing. Post-sektur doesn't mean anything if you don't know what the sector is or was, and I've only just learned how obscure those facts really are. In order to understand this very important thing I said, we'll have to turn back to the source. Long ago, Ethan Ralph coined the sector in a drunken tirade.
When it comes as an organizer, when it comes as a hype man, when it comes as just the MC, I'm unrivaled. And I don't feel like there is nobody who is on my level as an MC, as a hype man, and as an organizer in this sector. It's true. This sector, which is so important to fucking preserving our rights, has just completely disintegrated.
Now, when Ralph said this, all his listeners were surprised. We had to be. We didn't know what a sector was. It wasn't part of our usual parlance, and when we did start using it, no two users wrote sector alike. Eventually, everyone reached the same understanding. The sector was the Ralph universe. It was the Ethan Ralph Kiwi Farms board, or the Gunt board to OGs. The sector was all those personalities, entities, and shows which only mattered through conjunction with Ralph. Ethan Ralph and the kill stream and the show's audience in 2021 didn't appear out of nowhere. Back in 2018, there was a content market called Internet Blood Sports. Some people might have called it a community back in the day, but I'm being honest when I say it was a market. It was an economy built around the video game activist, Mr. Medicare. Internet Blood Sports was a group of streaming shows which sometimes sounded like a white pride forum and sometimes sounded like Opie and Anthony. In any case, they all ran on the same business model. Jim showed up on stream, fans bought t-shirts, and the hosts bought scary things. IBS was really just there to sell Jim's likeness. It was a celebrity endorsement, no different from the marketing tactics of Pepsi.
Burger King and Wendy's and McDonald's.
This was the fact of the matter. No Jim, no money, no show. The three programs that Jim christened in his Internet Blood Sports video were Worski Live, The Baked Alaska Show, and The Morning Kumite. All three shows failed as soon as he stopped appearing. Ethan Ralph's kill stream earned the highest gross of any blood sports show in 2018, and it also cratered when Jim pulled his support. Within a year, the IBS moniker had become obsolete. Mr. Medicare streamed all on his own in 2019, while everybody else perished. The Kumite closed due to AIDS, Andy Worski left the internet, and Ethan Ralph spent that year floundering in obscurity. Despite a few setbacks, in the second half of the year, the kill stream aired most nights of the week, albeit as a shell of its old self. To his advantage, Ralph still had a lot of goodwill and a lot of guests he could reach out to, but he was also streaming on alt-tech sites, and Jim was gone, and there wasn't money to go around like there used to be. While the rest of the taxon had gone extinct, the kill stream was left in a class of its own, aimless and endangered. It was broadly right-wing and broadly about drama, so in the spring of 2020, Ralph might feature Richard Spencer on a Thursday and John Swan on a Friday. And regardless, nobody watched. That changed in the summer, once Ralph was committed to ruining his life, along with the lives of his mother, girlfriend, and servant. The Gunt tape was the point of no return. On August 11th, 2020, the image of Ralph sticking his hoof into Faith Vickers filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. It was clear that Ethan Ralph was exceptional, and that we need a much larger endowment to study him seriously. That's how we got the Gunt board, a new Kiwi Farms forum which was about Ralph and all that grew from his humus. IBS was there to exploit Jim, and the Gunt board was there to exploit Ralph. The Ralph resource was pillaged in a number of ways by a number of parties. For the purpose of this video, I'll ignore all the streamers who made genuine fortunes covering Ethan Ralph. There wasn't any money in the Gunt board, but there were a few incentives indigenous to the site. Kiwi Farms is made up of thousands of threads, each containing a little society devoted to the lolcow. Each thread has its own culture and its own rapport, but basically all of them adhere to two principles that are site-wide. The threads exist for discussion, and they exist for documentation. In other words, keep your posts readable and archive everything. Some people will make more valuable posts than others, and a natural hierarchy of users eventually develops in any living thread. Everybody likes this arrangement because it rewards posters who are helpful. Back in the day, the informative posters all had high profile scores. Their posts were highlighted. It was all very exciting. Ralph's old thread had a lot of diligent archivists, but the Gunt board gave us room to build a whole different discipline. Now we could write threads, we could write OPs, and be the first name anybody saw when they, opened a relevant thread. If the thread started was halfway decent, the author would be showered in stickers. I wrote Gator's OP within 10 minutes of the board opening. At that moment, it was literally 3 sentences long. But I claimed that thread because I knew the facts above. Everybody did, and Ralph's board accrued many useless threads. I'm not talking about the joke threads. I mean, there was a brand of quasi-informative threads that looked high effort at a glance, but were actually meritless. On the site, we like to say archive everything, but these were clearly beyond the pale. This sort of documentation hurt readability. The zealous posters coexisted with those who didn't care at all, who would write OPs with 0 archives. This wasn't documentation. But the more common issue turned out to be posts that weren't discussion. There was always a self-consciousness to Ralph's board because many users simply did not want the content to stop. In 2020, Ralph's thread had been a all-year event for some of us, and at times it felt like an endless narrative. A few of the users had forgotten that great narratives are delivered by great pace. The old epics were sung with rests, and Ralph's story was no different. He had busy days, he had slow days, but we were always posting. There weren't slow days on the board, because if users weren't talking about something, they were talking about nothing. Once again, this hurt readability. Some of you may remember my statement from April 2021 concerning low-quality posts. Here, I admonish the board for making bad posts, exactly like the ones I made in Ralph's OG thread. In fact, many of the early reports that moderation dealt with were cleaning up poorly formatted, redundant posts. The problem always got worse when we had company. The tourists were the most savage enemies of our society. Threads and boards on Kiwi farms are often as walled off from each other as city-states, but the greatest strongholds are easily stormed by metropolitans. Kiwi farms is interesting because on top of individual lolcow cultures, there is a site-wide culture with its own traits, most of which are learned from Josh Moon, the site owner. Mad at the Internet is a podcast where he recaps the happenings of the week, but his coverage has a way of biasing threads. If they get featured, they get streamed, and if they get streamed, they get featured again. This is how the community at large learns what it wants, and the Gunt board was ravaged anytime Ralph got featured. The tourists simply came by to let us know they came by. They littered the threads with interchangeable posts. The users who really cared were more detrimental. Beyond the users who merely liked the site, there's a section of users who love Josh Moon. He's their favorite e-celeb, streamer, free speech warrior. These are the ones who really needed Noel's attention, and they were camping out in threads hoping to catch Josh on his way by. They tagged him constantly, and a few were very proactive with their essays and so-called effort posts, which they hoped to be featured or used for prep. In short, they wanted to be part of the show. What's worse is that the board was double dipping. Around the time that Sektur was first coined, Ralph was doing a morning show, the Tequila Sunrise. It never streamed before 12 p.m. Eastern, and all Ralph would do was fight Kiwi Farms users. He was streaming chat usernames every day of the week. It was gross, but it was content. Ralph was content in 2021, but he was also addicted to downers. Sometimes he would get sleepy, and days would pass where nothing was happening. The board still had to fuel itself, and when Ralph wasn't putting out, we ran on user drama. Everybody was famous, and everybody was jealous, and in the winter of 2021, the sheets separating lolcows and users were thawing. It had been getting that way ever since e-celebs started openly posting to Ralph's board. We had users who died in the line of duty as PPP staff, and at some point it was agreed that big users warranted threads. The threads came, and the user doxes naturally followed. 2022 was an intense year, and many will recall my investment in that cruel business. I was a hard bargainer, but the other shareholders were equally ambitious. We traded blows, we lived by the sword, and by 2023 every man had fallen on his blade. That spring, all the bosses got their DMs leaked in a data breach. The sector's biggest actors were exposed, and everybody who dodged a dox in the last tier fled this scandal. After that, 2023 came and went. The sector had gotten so compressed that Mr. Medicare's summer rival was Elaine. Godwinson was making videos that people hated, and PPP's Kino Casino was moving away from Ralph coverage. The Gunt feuded with Nick Fuentes in the middle of the year, but all I remember is that nobody clipped it. The coverage on the board was terrible. I was being very private at that time, and my sector associates had also withdrawn. Some people were still throwing that word around, but it was a generic trademark. The project that name used to denote had gone under. The difference between 2023 and 2024 was night and day. Nick Rekieta, once a successful streamer in his own right, had been a marginal sector cow for years, and he finally decided to ruin his life. In 2024, we learned that he was addicted to drugs, that he hosted orgies, and that the police abducted his children. And then he got arrested. It was all very funny. It was the story that Kino Casino was following, and it was the big item on Maddie for most of that year. Certain Gunt users who had been gone for months and years came back for this happening. Finally, Nick Rekieta got his own board, and this was the real Volta. Nick's life was such a disaster that it was going to take a whole society to cover him. New faces made fortunes off of his likeness. People like Aaron Emholt and Patrick Milton warranted threads because they knew Rekieta. To his credit, Ralph was funny in 2024, and once or twice we all watched his pill streams, but now he was a legacy cow. Now we were thinking of him the same way other people thought about Chantel or DSP. Nobody could expect Ralph to be content anymore, and so his age had ended. This brings us up to the present. Post-sektur is an era where Ralph is exhausted. The votes have come in, everybody's cashed out, and even Mr. Medicare has made his statement.
So that's what 2025, the upcoming new year, means to me. A whole new batch of interesting characters. So I guess with the closing of 2024, I have to say goodbye to the sector. Goodbye, sector. Goodbye, Ethan Ralph. Enjoy living in a Mexican hovel. Goodbye, Nick Fuentes. Enjoy Yiddish grandmothers knocking on your door while you power slam them into the concrete and steal their phones. Goodbye, Mr. Rekieta. And somehow you've lost the house? I don't know how the fuck. Really don't know. I know that the house thing happened, but I don't know the backstory of it.
The sector had a dramatic collapse. The noise of that calamity was all our own, but the troubles were natural to the practice. The convulsions on the Gunt board were episodes which all mega threads revolve through. I watched the janky board spin through the stages in record time. Pat Tomlinson's thread is crawling through the Yugas. Cycles of cycles have turned Chris Chan over, and I'm discerning that Rudyard's thread is on a similar arc. There are already for-profit streams turning his little fits into commodities. His thread has been plundered by tourists, and the colony is close behind. By Odin's grace, Rudyard has telepathically granted me one truth to render unto thee. Post-sektur could mean a lot of things. It could mean a new golden age, or it could mean more of the same. Whatever the course, it will depend on the users. If there's a good free thing, will we keep it free or will it be bound and sold? Whatever you make of this question, at least we know Ralph's answer. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense.